The morning sun had barely risen over the city skyline when a young boy made his way to the bus stop, his backpack slung over his shoulder. At just 17 years old, he had already faced more challenges than most people do in a lifetime. You see, this wasn't just any ordinary teenager. He had lost his right leg in an accident when he was just 8 years old. Life had changed dramatically for him that day, but his spirit remained unbroken. His friends often said he had the brightest smile in school, and his teachers admired how he never used his prosthetic leg as an excuse to skip gym class or avoid school activities. In fact, he had become quite skilled at navigating his daily routine, though some days were definitely harder than others. This particular Tuesday morning was one of those challenging days. The previous evening, he had pushed himself extra hard during his physical therapy session. His therapist had introduced some new exercises to help him improve his balance, and while he was proud of his progress, his muscles were definitely feeling the strain. Standing at the bus stop, he shifted his weight from one leg to the other, trying to find the most comfortable position. The familiar faces of other regular commuters began gathering around. The office worker who always wore colorful ties, the elderly lady with her crossword puzzle book, and the college student perpetually buried in her textbooks. The screech of brakes announced the arrival of the 7:15 bus, right on schedule. As the doors hissed open, he let a few people board first, knowing it was easier for him to navigate the bus when there wasn't a crowd pushing from behind. He had learned these little tricks over the years, small adjustments that make his daily journey smoother. Inside the bus, he was lucky enough to spot an empty seat near the middle. Getting to it required some careful maneuvering, holding onto the railings, timing his steps with the bus's movement, and being mindful of other passengers. But he had become an expert at this daily dance, barely drawing any attention to himself as he made his way down the aisle. Settling into his seat, he couldn't help but notice how unusually crowded the bus was today. He overheard someone mention that one of the subway lines was down for maintenance, forcing more people than usual onto the bus route. He tucked his backpack onto his lap, making himself as compact as possible to leave room for others. Looking out the window, he watched the city wake up around him. Street vendors were setting up their breakfast carts, early morning joggers dodged around pedestrians, and delivery trucks made their first rounds of the day. It was a scene he had witnessed hundreds of times before, yet somehow it never got old. As the bus continued its route downtown, he thought about the day ahead. There was a history test first period that he had studied hard for, and after school, he was looking forward to meeting his friends at their favorite pizza place. Just another normal day in the life of a teenager who happened to have one leg, at least, that's how he saw it. Little did he know that this ordinary Tuesday was about to become anything but ordinary. His simple bus ride would soon turn into a moment that would change not just his life, but the lives of others in ways he couldn't imagine. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories start on the most ordinary days, and this was about to be one of those moments. The bus lurched forward as it merged into the morning traffic, causing everyone to sway slightly. Our young hero gripped the edge of his seat, maintaining his balance as the vehicle navigated through the busy streets. Today was different from other mornings. The usual crowd had nearly doubled, with people packed together like sardines in a can. The reason for the overcrowding became clear when a fellow passenger mentioned that the downtown subway line had broken down. Could be closed for hours, someone near the front called out. You could feel the collective sigh of frustration from the regular subway riders who were forced to take the bus instead. Looking around, he noticed how everyone seemed to be in their own little world, despite being squeezed together. A businessman in a crisp suit was trying to balance his coffee cup while reading something on his phone. Two high school girls were sharing earbuds, quietly bobbing their heads to music. An elderly man had somehow managed to open his newspaper, the pages crinkling with each turn. The air inside the bus was getting warmer as more passengers squeezed in at each stop. The windows had started to fog up slightly, and someone reached up to wipe a clear patch with their sleeve. Through this makeshift window, the city continued to roll by, coffee shops with lines spilling onto the sidewalk, crossing guards helping children navigate busy intersections, and street cleaners starting their morning routines. His prosthetic leg was starting to feel a bit uncomfortable. Yesterday's physical therapy session had been particularly challenging. They'd worked on new techniques for managing uneven surfaces, and his muscles were still reminding him of every extra effort. He shifted in his seat, trying to find a more comfortable position without drawing attention to himself. The bus driver's voice crackled over the speaker, announcing delays due to construction ahead. More sighs and a few groans rippled through the crowd. A few people checked their watches, probably mentally calculating if they'd be late for work or school. The young man wasn't too worried. He always left home early enough to handle unexpected delays. He watched as people at each stop struggled to squeeze through the packed bus. Some gave up entirely, deciding to wait for the next one despite the driver's warning that it would be just as crowded. The whole situation reminded him of one of those puzzle games where you have to slide pieces around to create space. His backpack felt heavier on his lap as time went on, filled with textbooks for the day ahead. He thought about moving it to the floor, but quickly dismissed the idea. There wasn't even enough space to see the floor anymore. The crowd had grown so thick that people were practically having conversations with each other's shoulders. Through the gaps between passengers, he could see new people still trying to board at each stop. Most were wearing expressions of resignation as they surveyed the packed space, but they squeezed in anyway, probably already running late for their destinations. The bus had become a perfect example of city life, everyone together, yet somehow managing to maintain their own personal space, even if it was just a few inches. He checked his phone, still plenty of time before school started, despite the delays. That's when he noticed someone new struggling to board the bus at the downtown stop. This moment would turn an ordinary crowded bus ride into something completely unexpected, something that would remind everyone on board about the power of simple kindness and the connections that can form in the most ordinary places. At the downtown stop, the bus doors opened with their usual hiss, and that's when everyone noticed her. A pregnant woman, probably in her last few months, stood at the entrance, looking hesitantly at the packed bus. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a heavy-looking bag, her free hand resting protectively on her belly. The morning sun caught her face as she stepped up, highlighting the tiredness in her eyes. You could tell she'd probably been on her feet far too long already, and the day had barely begun. She tried to smile as she squeezed into the small space near the front, but anyone could see she was struggling to keep her balance as the bus started moving again. The other passengers noticed her too. You could see it in their faces. Some quickly looked away, pretending to be absorbed in their phones or newspapers. Others gave apologetic glances but didn't move. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but nobody offered to stand. It was one of those moments that make you think about how people sometimes forget to look out for each other in busy city life. With each turn and stop of the bus, the pregnant woman swayed more noticeably. She gripped the overhead handle tightly, her knuckles turning white with the effort. Her other hand never left her belly, instinctively protecting her unborn child as the bus jerked through traffic. A light sheen of sweat appeared on her forehead, and she bit her lip, clearly trying to hide her discomfort. The bus hit a small pothole, causing everyone to bounce slightly. The pregnant woman stumbled a bit, and several passengers gasped. An older man reached out to steady her, but quickly withdrew his hand once she regained her balance. The incident seemed to increase the tension in the air. Everyone knew someone should give up their seat, but nobody moved. You could see her trying to make the best of the situation. She adjusted her bag, shifted her weight from one foot to the other, and kept glancing around for any sign of a free seat. The morning traffic wasn't helping. The bus stopped and started repeatedly, making it even harder for her to maintain her balance. A teenage girl near the front was texting rapidly, probably telling her friends about the situation. A businessman in an expensive suit suddenly became very interested in his shoe. Even the usually chatty group of office workers had fallen silent, the awkwardness of the situation affecting everyone. The pregnant woman's face showed increasing strain as the minutes passed. She checked her watch, then looked out the window, perhaps wondering if she should have waited for the next bus. But everyone knew the next one would probably be just as crowded, maybe even worse. The air felt heavy with unspoken words. A few passengers exchanged knowing looks, each probably thinking the same thing: somebody should do something. The bus driver kept glancing in his rearview mirror, clearly concerned about his pregnant passenger, but unable to do anything from his position. That's when something changed in our young hero's expression. Watching from his seat in the middle of the bus, he made a decision that would turn this uncomfortable situation into something extraordinary. Sometimes the biggest moments come from the smallest choices, and his next action would remind everyone on that crowded bus about the true meaning of kindness. The young boy took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of his seat as he prepared to stand. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't going to be easy with his prosthetic leg, especially after yesterday's therapy session, but sometimes doing the right thing means pushing past your own discomfort. Several passengers noticed his movement as he began the careful process of standing up. He had perfected this motion over the years, but doing it on a moving bus was always tricky. First, he shifted his weight to his good leg, using the seat in front of him for balance. The bus swayed slightly, making him pause for a moment. A few curious eyes watched as he steadied himself. Some people probably wondered why someone with a prosthetic leg would give up their seat when others, more physically able, remained seated. But that thought never crossed his mind. He saw someone in need, and that was all that mattered to him. The process of standing took a few more seconds than it would for most people. He had to be careful about his balance, making sure his prosthetic leg was positioned just right. The motion wasn't as smooth as he would have liked. The crowded bus and constant movement made it more challenging than usual. Finally upright, he held onto the back of his former seat with one hand, his backpack clutched in the other. The bus hit a small bump, and he swayed slightly but managed to keep his balance. A woman next to him reached out instinctively to help, but he gave her a gentle smile, showing he was okay. Looking toward the front of the bus, he caught the pregnant woman's eye. She hadn't noticed him standing up at first, still focused on maintaining her own balance. When she did see him, her eyes moved from his face to his prosthetic leg, then back to his face again. The surprise was clear in her expression. He gestured to his now empty seat with a warm smile. "Please," he said, just loud enough to be heard over the bus engine. His voice was kind but firm, leaving no room for argument. The other passengers watched this exchange in silence, some with expressions of admiration, others with looks of shame for not having offered their own seats. The pregnant woman hesitated, her eyes still fixed on his prosthetic leg. You could see the internal struggle on her face, the desperate need to sit down fighting with her concern for the young boy's comfort. Her hand tightened on the overhead handle as the bus turned a corner. Other passengers began to stir, perhaps finally awakening to their own responsibility. A man in a business suit half rose from his seat, but our young hero shook his head with a smile. He had already committed to this act of kindness, and he would see it through. The moment hung in the air. A simple gesture of giving up a seat had somehow transformed the atmosphere on the entire bus. What happened next would turn this everyday act of kindness into something even more meaningful, something that would touch not just these two lives, but many others in unexpected ways. The pregnant woman finally began moving toward the empty seat, her steps careful and measured in the swaying bus. As she got closer, she could clearly see the young boy's prosthetic leg, and tears started forming in her eyes. "Oh no," she said softly, "I can't take your seat. You need it more than I do." The boy's smile never wavered. Instead, it grew warmer, more reassuring. "It's really okay," he said, his voice gentle but confident. "My stop isn't far, and you've been standing too long already." He kept his hand steadily on the seat back, maintaining his balance as the bus drove through the morning traffic. Something in his voice, the simple kindness of it, seemed to touch everyone who could hear him. The other passengers, who had been pretending not to watch, now looked on openly. A few smiled, while others looked down at their phones or feet, perhaps feeling a bit guilty about their own inaction. The pregnant woman still hesitated, her eyes moving between the boy's face and his prosthetic leg. "But your leg," she started to say, her voice filled with concern. The boy shook his head, cutting off her protest with the same warm smile. "Having one leg doesn't mean I can't help others," he said simply. "Please, take the seat." His words hung in the air for a moment, powerful in their simplicity. They weren't just about giving up a seat anymore. They were about refusing to let challenges prevent you from showing kindness to others. The morning sunlight streaming through the bus windows seemed to grow a bit brighter, as if nature itself approved of this moment. Finally, the pregnant woman nodded, emotion clear on her face. As she carefully lowered herself into the seat, she wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. The relief of sitting down was visible in her expression, but there was something else there too. A look of deep thought, as if she was seeing something beyond just this moment. The boy adjusted his stance, finding his balance as the bus continued its journey. He'd gotten good at standing on buses over the years, knowing exactly how to position his prosthetic leg to stay steady. A few other passengers watched him with newfound respect, seeing not the disability they'd noticed before, but the strength of character it took to make such a gesture. The pregnant woman looked up at him, still emotional but now with a hint of something else in her expression, almost like recognition or perhaps inspiration. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again, as if gathering her thoughts. Whatever she was about to say, it was clear it was more than just a simple thank you. The other passengers could feel it too. This wasn't just about a seat on a bus anymore. Something bigger was about to happen, something that would change both these people's lives in ways neither of them could expect. The morning commute had suddenly become the setting for an extraordinary moment of human connection. As the bus rolled on through the city streets, the pregnant woman finally found her voice. What she was about to say would transform this simple act of kindness into something much more meaningful, something that would ripple out and touch many more lives beyond just this crowded morning bus. The pregnant woman took a deep breath, her hands folded protectively over her belly as she looked up at the boy. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice slightly shaky with emotion. "I work at the Children's Hospital downtown." She paused, gathering her thoughts as the bus gently swayed. The boy steadied himself against the seat, listening curiously. Around them, other passengers tried to pretend they weren't interested, but you could see them leaning in slightly, drawn into this unexpected moment. The morning rush hour had suddenly become something more meaningful. "I'm a specialist," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I work with children who need prosthetic limbs." Her eyes grew misty as she spoke, but her smile was bright. "Every day, I meet young kids who think their lives are over because they've lost a leg or an arm. They're scared, confused, and they don't believe they'll ever be able to do normal things again." The boy's eyes widened as he understood the significance of their chance meeting. Other passengers had stopped pretending not to listen, now openly watching this extraordinary conversation unfold. Even the businessman who had been so absorbed in his phone earlier was now paying full attention. "What you just did," she said, gesturing to the seat she was sitting in, "this simple act of kindness, this is exactly what I try to teach my young patients." Her voice cracked slightly with emotion. "I tell them that having a prosthetic limb doesn't define them. It doesn't limit their ability to be kind, to help others, to make a difference in the world." The bus hit a small bump, and the boy adjusted his stance, but his attention never wavered from her words. The morning sun streaming through the windows seemed to create a spotlight on this moment, making it feel even more special. "You know what the hardest part of my job is?" she asked, though it was clear she wasn't really expecting an answer. "It's not the technical stuff. Teaching them how to use their new limbs, helping them with physical therapy. The hardest part is helping them believe in themselves again, helping them see that they're still capable of anything they set their minds to." She wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "And here you are, proving everything I've been trying to teach them. You didn't let your prosthetic leg stop you from being kind. You didn't use it as an excuse to keep your seat when you saw someone in need. You showed exactly the kind of strength I want my patients to believe they have." The other passengers on the bus had fallen completely silent now, many of them moved by her words. The usual sounds of the city outside seemed to fade away, as if the whole world was focused on this conversation between two strangers whose paths had crossed in such a meaningful way. The boy stood there, processing her words, his hands steady on the seat back. What she was about to say next would turn this chance encounter into something even more extraordinary, an opportunity that would impact not just his life, but the lives of countless other children facing similar challenges. Reaching into her bag, the pregnant woman pulled out a small white business card. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it out to the boy. "I want you to come visit us at the hospital," she said, her voice filled with hope and purpose. "There are so many children there who need to meet someone like you." The boy took the card carefully, looking at it with a mix of surprise and wonder. Around them, the other passengers watched the scene unfold, many of them smiling now, understanding they were witnessing something truly special. The morning commute had transformed into a moment of destiny. You see, she continued, a hand resting on her belly, these kids, they're so young. Most of them have just experienced the biggest challenge of their lives. They're scared, and they need more than just medical care. They need hope. They need to see that their future can be bright. The bus turned a corner, and the boy shifted his weight smoothly, having mastered the art of standing with his prosthetic leg. His eyes never left the woman's face as she spoke, taking in every word. The sincerity in her voice touched everyone within earshot. When you stood up for me today, she said, you didn't just offer me a seat. You showed something incredible. You showed that having a prosthetic limb doesn't stop you from being kind, from thinking of others, from living a full life. That's exactly what our kids need to see. An older lady sitting nearby wiped a tear from her eye. The teenager who had been texting earlier had put her phone away, completely absorbed in the conversation. Even the bus driver was stealing glances in his rearview mirror, clearly moved by what he was hearing. I work with children who've lost limbs for all sorts of reasons. Accidents, illness, some were born that way, the woman explained. And their biggest fear isn't about the physical challenges. It's about whether they can still be normal, whether they can still make a difference in the world. You just prove that they can. The boy looked down at the business card again, then back at the woman. His expression showed he was beginning to understand the magnitude of this opportunity. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of his children who needed someone to show them what was possible. You wouldn't have to do much, she added quickly, seeing his thought. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle rumble of the bus engine as the boy carefully tucked the business card into his pocket. His face broke into a bright smile that seemed to light up the entire bus. I'd love to help, he said, his voice filled with genuine excitement. I never thought my morning bus ride would turn into something like this. The pregnant woman beamed back at him, relief and joy mixing on her face. When could you start? She asked eagerly, then quickly added, of course, I know you have school and other commitments. We could work around your schedule. She was already pulling out her phone, ready to make notes. I have afternoons free most days, the boy replied, adjusting his stance as the bus slowed for a stop. And weekends too. I remember how scared I was when I first got my prosthetic leg. If I can help other kids feel less afraid, I want to do that. His words carried such sincerity that several nearby passengers nodded in approval. As they talked, the woman shared more about the children she worked with. We have a 10-year-old who lost his leg just last month, she said softly. He hasn't smiled since the surgery. And a 12-year-old girl who keeps asking if she'll ever be able to play sports again. She looked up at the boy hopefully. Would you mind telling them about your experiences? The boy nodded enthusiastically. I still play basketball, he said proudly. It took time to learn how to move differently, but I figured it out. And I'm on the school swim team too. His face grew thoughtful. I could show them that it gets easier. That different doesn't mean impossible. An elderly man who had been listening nearby spoke up. Young man, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. What you're doing here, it's something special. Others around them murmured in agreement. The morning commute had become a moment of community, of shared humanity. The pregnant woman's eyes sparkled with tears again, but this time they were happy tears. You know, she said, some of our kids think they'll never be able to do kind things for others anymore. They focus so much on what they think they've lost, they forget about all they can still give. She gestured to the seat she was sitting in. You just proved them wrong in the most beautiful way. The bus driver called out another stop, and a few passengers reluctantly moved toward the exit, looking back as if they didn't want to miss any part of this extraordinary conversation. Those who remained were still completely invested in the unfolding story. I have group therapy sessions on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, the woman explained, growing more animated as she talked. The kids share their fears and challenges. Having you there, showing them what's possible. She trailed off, overcome with emotion at the possibility. The boy's response would show just how much this chance encounter would change not just his life, but the lives of countless children struggling to find their way after losing a limb. Sometimes the most meaningful connections happen in the most ordinary places, like a crowded city bus on a regular Tuesday morning. 3 weeks later, the children's ward of the downtown hospital was filled with an energy it hadn't seen in months. The young boy who had given up his bus seat that fateful morning was sitting in a circle with 5 young patients, all of them sporting different types of prosthetic limbs. Their faces were bright with interest as he demonstrated how he tied his shoes. "See, it's like solving a puzzle," he explained, showing them his technique. "You just need to find your own way of doing things." A young girl with a prosthetic arm leaned forward, her eyes wide with hope as she watched. Just last week, she'd been convinced she'd never be able to do simple tasks again. Now, she was already asking about when she could try playing her violin. The pregnant woman, now their regular doctor, stood in the doorway watching the scene unfold. She remembered that morning on the bus like it was yesterday, how a simple act of kindness had turned into something so much bigger. Since then, the boy had been coming twice a week, turning their usual therapy sessions into something the kids actually looked forward to. "Tell us about basketball again," called out a 10-year-old boy from the back of the group. His own prosthetic leg was still new, and until recently, he'd refused to believe he could ever play sports again. But yesterday, he'd asked his parents to bring his basketball to the next session. Small steps, but important ones. The young mentor smiled, remembering his own journey. "The first time I tried to play after getting my prosthetic, I fell down a lot," he admitted honestly. The kids giggled, but they were listening intently. "But here's the thing, falling down isn't failing. Getting back up is what matters. And now? Now I can dribble, shoot, and even jump for rebounds." Parents gathered at the window of the therapy room, watching with tears in their eyes. They saw their children smiling, laughing, asking questions, things that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. One mother whispered to another, "My son actually asked to go to the park yesterday. First time since the accident." The boy looked around the circle at the young faces. Some of them he recognized from his own doubts and fears years ago. But now they were beginning to show the same spark of determination he'd discovered, the understanding that being different didn't mean being less capable of living a full life. As the session continued, a new patient wheeled into the room, a teenage girl who had lost her leg just days ago. She looked scared, withdrawn just like all of them had been at first. The boy caught the doctor's eye and nodded. They both knew that in a few weeks, this girl too would be part of their growing community of warriors. The afternoon sun streamed through the hospital windows, creating a warm glow in the room. What had started as a simple gesture on a crowded bus had grown into something extraordinary. Every Tuesday and Thursday, hope was being rebuilt, confidence restored, and futures reimagined. As the boy wrapped up the session with high fives and fist bumps, he thought about that morning on the bus. One small choice to stand up had led him here, helping these kids find their way back to believing in themselves. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest ripples of change, touching lives in ways we never could have imagined.